to the carriers track of Telecom's World Asia 2017. We're now heading into the second stretch of the morning and have broken into tracks. This is the carriers track. I always love how they have those announcements on flights in the US that this is the United Airlines flight from Washington to Chicago. If that's not the flight that you want to be on, please leave now. So similarly, if this is not where you want to be, this would be a good time to run. So this morning, I'm going to present for about 20 minutes on trends in the international telecom industry, focusing particularly on the network sector. And we'll then follow that with a panel discussion on on rethinking and redesigning and the future of the carrier business, essentially. By way of background, I'm an analyst at TeleGeography. I wanted to mention I'm going to present a lot of data and a lot of numbers over the next 20 minutes. And I know always that people end up taking pictures with their cameras, with their cell phones during the presentation. I'm happy to send you the slides, so you don't need to do that. Just write down my email address, send me a note. I'll happily send you the slides this evening when I'm back in my room. Otherwise, I'm sure Regina and Hazel will make them available to you in a week or two or so after the conference. But I'm happy to send you the slides. Just give me your card or email me and I'll send you a link this evening. So my presentation today is going to cover a broad range of issues related to network services. These are some of the research resources that it's going to draw upon. Also, while most of you are probably familiar with TeleGeography as a research firm, we did also launch our own conference focused on corporate network services. We started in 2013 in London with the WAN Summit there. That has now expanded to 4 conferences annually. We'll be in New York in April. We'll be in San Jose in June, in Singapore this September for the Singapore WAN Summit, and then in October we'll be back in London. So first I'd like to talk about just broad trends in the international networks market, looking at data requirements. And there's the slogan about, to paraphrase the slogan, you can never be too rich, you can never be too good looking, and you can never have too much bandwidth. We've seen surprisingly long, steady growth in international network requirements. This figure tracks what we describe as used international bandwidth, that is bandwidth that's been deployed in operating networks, as opposed to bandwidth that's being held in reserve for restoration or other purposes. It's grown, the growth rates are down from above 60% 6, 7, 8 years ago, but still remain in the range of roughly about 45% annually. Over the past 2 years, total international bandwidth has doubled from about 210 to 415 terabits per second. And those growth rates are surprisingly stable in markets around the world. We're seeing growth rates in the range of 45% or more on virtually every major intercontinental route, and rates in the range of nearly 60% on routes connecting to Africa. While total used bandwidth growth has been actually surprisingly stable over the past few years, we are seeing some changes in the drivers of demand. This figure tracks the used international bandwidth deployed by ISPs, by internet service providers, to provide internet service to end users, and bandwidth deployed on private networks, which are primarily content providers, and then also CDNs, research networks, military or government networks. These are networks that may be in some ways related to the internet, to delivering services to internet users, but that are not addressable via the internet. Since the 1990s, the internet has been the main driver of international bandwidth requirements. For most of the 2000s, internet bandwidth accounted for about 80% of international network requirements, and private networks about in the range of 20 to 22%. And that share remained fairly stable. until about 2011. Since 2011, internet bandwidth has grown at a rate of compound of about 35%, while bandwidth on private networks has grown around 70% annually. As a result, private network bandwidth has gone from about 21% in 2011 to 46% in 2016. And we project that this year, in 2017, it'll be the first year that total private network bandwidth overtakes internet bandwidth as the primary user of international capacity. It'll reach about 51% by our estimates at the end of this year. On the transatlantic route, we've already reached a stage where private bandwidth is about 60% of total used capacity. And here's what's driving that bandwidth demand, and the private bandwidth requirements in particular. These are the major current and announced data centers of the largest content providers globally, of Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, and Apple. And if you look at where those data centers are, you'll see that there's a lot in the US, there's a lot in Europe, there's a good number also in Asia. There are not many in Latin America, in Africa, the Middle East, and that in turn shapes bandwidth demand patterns. If you look at where the big private network requirements are, they're on primarily three interregional routes. There's transatlantic, there's the trans-Pacific route, and then there's also a lot of demand on intra-Asian capacity from bandwidth providers. In the transatlantic, as I said, they're now actually in the range of about 70% of total used bandwidth, and on intra-Asian links and trans-Pacific links in the range of about 58-59%, just under 60% by our estimates. However, on routes connecting to regions where they don't have a lot of data centers, be it US to South America or Middle East to Europe, you'll find that private bandwidth is still a small share of total bandwidth, about 12% of Middle East to Europe bandwidth, for example. Now, there's no shortage of potential capacity on existing networks. This figure only goes to 2015, but we should have it updated shortly, and we expect that the share of lit to potential bandwidth will actually decline in 2016 as more operators deploy 100 gig equipment and their estimates of potential bandwidth on some of the older systems expands. So broadly speaking, we're not seeing any real change in the ratio of potential to lit bandwidth. However, we're in a bit of a mini boom right now in terms of cable construction. Since the bubble years, the stupid years of 1999 to about 2001, we saw $14 billion worth of equipment buried at sea, and had a period of about 4 or 5 years where operators had to restructure, work their way through that. There was a lot of selling of depreciated and written off equipment, trying to straighten out their balance sheets. And then starting in 2008, things returned to sort of a kind of stability, where we saw gradual investment in cable infrastructure again for underlying organic reasons. The excess of the early 2000s had been used up, and demand was continuing to grow. Since 2008, between 2008 and 2016, we've seen an average of about $1.7 billion invested annually in new cable construction. But it has ticked up in the last few years, about $2.3 billion in 2016. Projects that are currently underway in 2017, we're expecting about $2.8 billion in CapEx. There's been a lot announced for 2018 in the range of about over $4 billion worth of investments. That's not all going to happen, obviously, but there's still enough projects that are definitely going to happen that it's going to be a big year also, at least by the recent historical standards. Though, of course, the amount of CapEx is nowhere near the scale of the early 2000s. And those cables are being built in a really diverse set of regions around the world. We saw obviously a good deal of construction on the Europe to Asia route with CME-5 entering service last year. AAE-1 is coming hot on the heels of CME-5. There was the BBG cable system. There's Transpac. We saw Faster enter service last year. CUS is coming this fall. New Cross Pacific is coming next year. And there's also been the CX system proposed from Indonesia to the US. That's an ambitious link. We'll see if that happens in 2018, which is what they're saying. But there's an enormous number of new projects, and certainly the CUS and the New Cross systems are going to get built. In intra-Asian systems, there's been less construction, as you can see in recent years. There was APG in 2016, but other than that, most of the current cable projects are focused more on infill. Smaller, discrete links linking 2 countries, maybe 3 countries, focused on getting connectivity to regional hubs and to regional markets. Systems to Myanmar, to Cambodia, to Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand. So providing capillarity, in particular the Southeast Asian region. There's a number of projects also planned for Oceania. Indigo West, or as many still call it APX West, from Perth to Singapore, which is going to happen next year. Hawaii cable from Australia to and New Zealand to the US is going to happen in 2018. And Southern Cross too, the marine survey is underway, and that'll probably come into being. They're saying 2018, odds are, given where they stand right now, it'll probably be 2019, but the marine survey for Southern Cross 2 is also underway. So as far as why cables are being built, despite the fact that there's plenty of potential capacity, there's a number of reasons. The most obvious is that if you look at who's building cables right now, a lot of it is being driven by their own internal requirements. The primary investors in cable systems right now are organizations with large internal bandwidth requirements. And they're building the cables because they need to find some way to cost-effectively transport that traffic, and they believe they can get the best cost base by investing in a new build. So it's large ISPs typically, and of course large content providers have taken a growing role in that market. Other reasons are route diversity. On the trans-Pacific routes, for example, there's a particular interest in diversifying away from reliance on systems connecting to Japan to make sure that there's no single point of failure in their networks. Big content providers like to have at least four paths of roughly equal scale across an ocean. So there's demand they want to make sure that they're not all connected to the same points of failure. In the Atlantic, for example, there's now an effort to diversify away from systems landing all on the UK. So there's the Maria system that's going to be built that connects to Spain. We also expect that we'll see a system connecting from the US to Scandinavia, again diversifying the routing options and also connecting directly to the data center hub that a lot of content providers have in Scandinavia. Now, as far as what impact this capacity is going to have on pricing, I think it's clear. Prices in the international networks market really only go down unless there's some company with some strong market position. But on most intra-Asian routes and trans-Pacific routes, we've been seeing price declines in the range of roughly 20 to 25% annually. These prices are medians in each market, which we use as a benchmark to track the relative rates of price decline. Prices do range widely. To take one example, and these are for one-off links, so for standalone circuits. Obviously, for customers buying multiple 10 gig waves or buying with large commitments or longer-term contracts, prices are a good deal lower. For example, if you look at the Hong Kong to Singapore price we're tracking here, the median of about 10K reflects a high quoted price of about $17,000, and we know there's no business being done at that price. It's it's a starting point and maybe someone's buying it, but the low quoted price is $6,500. In practice, customers that are doing volume business are buying probably more like at $5,000. But these are a useful benchmark for tracking overall rates of price declines. One other issue that's important is the relative rate of price decline. The weighted average price is falling faster than the nominal price. While nominal prices, while prices of 10 gig circuits have fallen 20 to 24%, the weighted average price, when you factor in volume transactions and 100 gig transactions, is probably falling more in the range of about 34% annually on these routes. And those price changes have been fairly consistent for a number of years. IP transit prices are falling on a similar path. They're falling a little bit more slowly right now than wholesale circuit prices. I think one factor may be that there's been less uptake of 100 gig ports in IP transit, in part because it's a very large commitment for a customer to make to one ISP because of multi-homing requirements. But they're falling in the range of also about 20% annually to 24% annually on most major routes. Now, we project that capacity requirements are going to keep growing steadily. We don't see any reason to believe that international bandwidth requirements are going to slow down in the next few years. We project that we'll still see in the range of about 45% compounded growth over the foreseeable future. And I think it's worth just noting what the implications are for compounding growth of 45%. Based on that growth rate, we project that in 2021, in 2022, we'll see operators going from 240 terabits per second of total used bandwidth across the Pacific to 355 terabits per second of used bandwidth. So the incremental increase in capacity across the Pacific in 2022, we project, will be in the range of about 115 terabits per second. To provide some perspective, that's roughly twice the maximum potential capacity of the faster cable. So the bandwidth requirements at that scale become enormous. We particularly project that growth is going to be strong on private network links. By 2022, we project that in the transatlantic route, private networks are going to account for about 90% of capacity. Intra-Asia and Trans-Pacific, we project that private network links are going to account for about 80% of used capacity. It's going to be a smaller share on other routes, about 30% or so on the Europe to Asia route, about 40% from the US to Latin America, and still only in the range of about 12% or so between Europe and the Middle East. In significant part because there's just real challenges to hosting content in the Middle East. And what's interesting here is that we're seeing kind of a reversal in a historical pattern. It used to be that the 45% growth rate in international bandwidth requirements was driven by internet service providers, ISPs who were buying capacity on intercontinental links to connect to upstream service providers and to connect to content providers. What's happening now is that those content providers are bringing that content ever closer to end users. They're putting their data centers in Europe, they're putting their data centers in Asia. Or companies like Facebook, their content is entirely dynamic and and very latency sensitive. So they push those data centers as close to end users as possible. So in effect, what's happening is rather than retail ISPs having to purchase capacity across the ocean to connect to their upstream providers and the content providers are buying the capacity in very, very large bulk and bringing the content closer to end users. So in a sense, that reduces the costs to the retail ISPs, but it also potentially reduces the business opportunity available for the wholesale arm of those organizations. And as a result, we project that of these trends and price declines, we project that revenue growth is going to continue to be challenging. Overall, we project growth in the range of about 2% annually on most routes. 2% annually compounded across all routes. Some regions are going to see more declines. Europe to Asia, we're projecting declines due to sharp price cuts with the deployment of CME and AAE. We're projecting meaningful price declines on the routes from the U.S. to Latin America. We do project more stable trends in the intra-Asian routes and trans-Pacific, where we see revenues growing probably in the range of about 2 to 3% annually. So nothing to get excited about, but also nothing to be particularly worried about right now. But the real question is what other opportunities are there? As the voice business continues to decline, it's going to be difficult to make up for that decline in just selling wholesale circuits as well. So the outlook is kind of murky. The view from there isn't really good, but I'm very interested in hearing what you guys are doing about it and what ideas you have for new opportunities for growth.